Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 24 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the New Jersey Devils, in which the Sharks have won 6-3. And it was just yesterday where I was talking about the Sharks' disastrous road record this season, a grand total of 0-10-0, with just 6 goals scored through those 10 games. And here tonight, in game number 11, the Sharks not only managed to get their first away win of the season, but also double up on their season goal total with 6 in the net tonight. This also marks a new season high in terms of goals scored, topping the St. Louis Blues game from a couple of weeks ago where they won 5-1. So this was definitely an impressive outing for the San Jose Sharks offensively, but in terms of a full 60-minute effort, this game wasn't technically all that different from the one yesterday against the Boston Bruins. And you may be wondering, how is a 6-3 victory not all that different from a 3-0 loss? Well, as was the case yesterday, the Sharks were pretty much outplayed through a good chunk of this game. Once again, the first period was rather salvageable, not the entirety of it, but for the first 10 or so minutes, the Sharks actually played rather well and had some strong offensive zone shifts. But from that point onward, most of this game was played in the neutral zone, if not just the San Jose Sharks defensive zone, as the Devils would end up almost tripling the Sharks' shot output here tonight. But what was the major difference between these two games? It is that the Sharks managed to capitalize on the Devils' mistakes and get those opportunistic chances. This is primarily where the Sharks did the majority of their goal scoring, besides the two McDonald ones, as we see Duclair and Granlund get goals all off of these rush type of chances converted from turnovers in the neutral zone, more or less. And so it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation when it comes to the game yesterday against the Bruins. Was it that the Bruins didn't make any mistakes, or was it that the Sharks didn't force mistakes that the Bruins could end up making? One or the other for sure, but at the end of the day here tonight, they did better things offensively, and that allowed them to get these 6 goals. Some, things do need to be said about the fact that the Devils' goaltending isn't particularly good, and perhaps with a better goaltender, this game ends up being a bit closer, but that's not really anything that the Sharks can control, and so them getting the 6-3 victory and getting their first road win was quite nice to see. Let's start off here. As I mentioned in the first period, it is Jacob McDonald who gets the goals to put the Sharks on the board, and as I've mentioned many times in the past, it's key for the Sharks to score the first goal. They have yet to win a game in which they do not do that, and that trend continues here tonight. It is tied up by Dawson Mercer on the power play, and so it is a 1-1 game heading into the second period, and in that period, the Sharks only managed to get 3 shots on net, and yet 2 of them end up being goals. Well, another being from McDonald and then one from Duclair to make it 3-1 San Jose, and that was the score at the end of 40 minutes. In the third, within the first couple of minutes, the Sharks would give up 2 odd man rushes, the first of which would be very close to a goal, the second of which would end up being a goal from Jack Hughes to put this game to within 1. But that was a theme in the third period. Whenever the Devils were able to close in on that Sharks lead, they would add to it with yet another insurance goal. So after the Hughes goal to make it 3-2, Duclair scores another to make it 4-2. Then it's brought to within 1 once more by Andre Palat, which is then expanded on further by Granlund to make it a 5-3 game. And though the Devils do pull their goaltender with a good 4 minutes remaining on the clock, the Sharks kill it off entirely until William Eklund gets the empty netter with about 30 seconds to go, and as I said, the Sharks win it 6-3. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the top line here for San Jose. I was not impressed with how this line performed in the previous game against the Boston Bruins, and similar things can definitely be said here tonight. In terms of offensive output from these 3 players, there really wasn't much of anything. Hertl was incredibly invisible, Eklund did not do much either, and Hoffman not a good player in these past couple of games on this top line. And I do definitely look a bit more towards Hoffman in this situation as perhaps getting more blame than the other 2 players. Obviously, Hertl has proven enough to remain as a first-line center throughout his entire career, not just this season, and Eklund has been doing some very good things. Hoffman got here off of a very nice hot streak of games where he pulled together multiple goals, but in these last couple of ones, you see why Hoffman may not be built for a first-line position. There were a couple of times in this one where the Sharks had an opportunity to get a decent offensive zone shift off for this line, but both times Hoffman gets the puck and then makes a pass, the first one to Eklund, the second one to Hertl later on in the game, and both times the puck is way behind those players, which ends up just turning it the other way for the Devils. And otherwise, there isn't really anything doing here. This is not to say, though, that this was necessarily a bad game for at least the two other players on this line. In fact, I thought Eklund was very strong defensively, which is then nice to see that he was rewarded with the empty net goal late in this game. It was a very strong game. Not only did he make multiple nice blocks from point shots from the Devils, as well as a couple of good takeaways in the defensive zone, one of them being from Jack Hughes, who's one of the more skilled players in the NHL today. So for a player who David Quinn has been somewhat critical of, though maybe unfairly so, for their defensive play, Eklund putting up a strong one here tonight was quite impressive. On to the second line. This was a line that had a bit of a weird one here tonight, because obviously if you take a look at the scoreboard here, you see Duclair's name pop up twice, you see Granlund's name pop up once, and so you're thinking, wow, what a fantastic game from this second line. Well, sort of, but not exactly, because when it came to actually getting zone time, cycling the puck, this line did basically none of that throughout most of this game. They had like a shift or two in the first period that were not bad, but past that point, nothing really happened here, and yet this was the line that was deadly against the Devils by being able to turn pucks over in that neutral zone and get their opportunities. So Duclair scoring this first one off of a nice turnover, or a nice takeaway play by Granlund to turn in this 2-on-1. Then we have Duclair making a fantastic one-timer off of a great pass also from Mikael Granlund, and then Granlund showing the tenacity to come in here after a strong Duclair solo effort in the offensive zone to then get the goal that ends up being the 5-3-1, a secure goal there. So it's very nice that they were able to get those chances, but as a line, nothing really ended up happening, and you could see that by the fact that Zetterlund ends up being kind of the odd man out here, because while Granlund and Duclair made up a strong duo here tonight, getting those offensive chances, because this line didn't actually roll anything fantastic, Zetterlund on the outside looking in of those chances didn't end up really appearing much at all in this game past the first few minutes, like I said. When it comes to the third line, we had Labanc, Sturm, and McDonald, so Cunnin not playing tonight here due to injury. So as per usual, Labanc, who seemingly is acting as the 13th forward this season, he steps into the lineup. And this was a strong game for sure from the third line. And we obviously have to talk first about Jacob McDonald, who scores 2 goals here tonight, the first 2 of the game for the San Jose Sharks. And you could tell right away that McDonald was going to be rolling here tonight. Not only does he score this goal on what I believe was the first shift for him of this game, perhaps the second one, but then on the immediate shift after, he again puts up a strong one in the offensive zone. And it was just nice to see him finally get involved offensively. He seemed like such a perimeter player in these last few games on this third line, really just not contributing much of anything. It was an okay outing against Boston yesterday, but prior to that, there really was just an invisible winger on that third line. But here tonight, he's actually getting involved. He's actually battling for pucks, which as a defenseman, you would expect him to do anyhow, even though he is playing in the winger position. And because of this, it led directly to this first goal and also partially to the second goal as well. When it comes to his 2 line mates on the night, I thought Nico Sturm did some very good things offensively, helped really facilitate these couple of goals for McDonald for sure. And I also thought Labanc had a pretty solid game here. He actually made a strong board play that would eventually lead a few seconds later to that first McDonald goal. And while Labanc had a couple of issues defensively, you could certainly point towards him as being at fault for that Palat goal that made it 4-3 in the third period. I thought generally he did a lot of good things here tonight, things that we don't usually see from Kevin Labanc. And so while I think he might very well just be on the outside looking in of the lineup if indeed Cunnin is healthy enough to return in the following game, I wouldn't think that it's necessarily because of his play and just because David Quinn doesn't really like him. And then when it comes to the fourth line, we didn't really see much from most of these players. Both Giovanni Smith and Justin Bailey are kind of like fourth line players where they really only play in that situation. Bailey does get second power play time, but the Sharks did not get a power play here tonight, so he didn't really get an opportunity to show that off. But at the very least, Ryan Carpenter does get played in other situations, not only on the penalty kill, but even in just some more defensive type of places. For instance, he actually has an assist on the William Eklund empty netter because David Quinn didn't want to play Mike Hoffman in an empty net type of situation because he's not exactly known for his defensive play. So it ended up being Hertl, Eklund, as well as Ryan Carpenter in that situation. So it was nice to see him play a pretty solid defensive game. The other two players, though, pretty inconsequential. From a defensive standpoint, we have the top pairing of both Ferraro and Emberson. And like I mentioned earlier on, the Sharks were playing the majority of this game in this defensive zone. As per usual, like it has been thus far this season, the Sharks defensive core is not particularly good at clearing pucks out. They're not particularly good at retrieving pucks down below their goal line, and so they're kind of just going to get pelted. And so generally, while none of these players you would say had a marvelous game where they're controlling the pace here, a few of them at least stand out in a semi-positive way. The first of which would be Mario Ferraro. I was extremely critical of Ferraro's game in the previous one against the Boston Bruins. Here tonight, he definitely showed some improvement. Obviously not perfect, not amazing, not anything fantastic, but it was decent enough from a Sharks relative to his teammates, I guess you could say. Emberson, not as noticeable as he has been in these past couple of games. I was very high on Emberson in these last couple, but here tonight didn't really do much on that offensive standpoint, which is what I've really been liking from Emberson. From a defensive standpoint, he was solid enough, so I guess that's a good thing. On the second pairing, we have Addison and Benning, who definitely had bounce-back games. Yesterday, they were really, really bad against Boston. Addison, while still having some issues, for instance, he continues to have issues controlling the puck. He bobbles it near the blue line that leads to the Jack Hughes goal that makes it 3-2 early in the third period. And this just seems to be a theme for Calen Addison at this point. It feels as though at multiple times per game, he just sort of mishandles pucks near the offensive blue line. But from a defensive standpoint, he was not as much of a disaster as he was yesterday, so that's some improvement. And then when it comes to the third pairing, we have a Hutchuk as well as Kyle Burroughs. These guys found themselves more in the defensive zone, even more so than the average for the other two defensive pairings. It was, an okay game for a Hutchuk because I did like him being able to jump into the play a couple of times, but once more, there's the bad giveaways, there's the poor positioning, and it's just not been a fantastic stretch of games for a Hutchuk as of late. The fact is that if it was not Mark-Edouard Vlasic as the seventh defenseman here, he probably would have been out of the lineup. I don't know why Knyzhov isn't getting more looks, because while Knyzhov has never been fantastic in the games he's played this season, he has looked okay enough. And I know a Hutchuk is a physical presence more so than maybe any other player on this blue line at this point. And he is contributing with some assists here or there, but he's definitely a bit of a liability defensively, and especially as a young player, you would think David Quinn would target that, and yet he's managed to stay in the lineup. It's quite interesting, the case there. And then finally, we have the goaltender Kaapo Kähkönen, who had a very good game here tonight. It should be noted that he had some marvelous saves in the first period on the first Devils power play. Unfortunately, they would end up scoring off of some crazy bounces, like off the backboards, off the top of the net, and then batted in with a not a high stick, but a stick up in the air, out of the air there. So can't really blame Kähkönen for that one. The Hughes goal was just a fantastic shot. That was definitely a difficult save in like a 2-on-1 type of situation. And then the Palat one was just bad defense in front for the Sharks. Otherwise, he made a ton of saves, over I think 45 saves here tonight. And it was a great outing here for Kähkönen. Generally, like I've mentioned before in the past, the Sharks goaltending has been quite serviceable this season. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action in a couple of days, where they will take on the New York Rangers as this East Coast road trip will continue. The Rangers, one of the best teams actually in the Eastern Conference. We'll see if the Sharks can continue to find this road success, or if they will revert back to the 0-10-0 Sharks. Class dismissed.